Welcome to the first episode in a Legendarium series about King Henry V of England. In this installment, Let the Boy Earn His Spurs, we will talk about the upbringing of the boy who would become King Henry V, and how he became part of the royal household after King Richard II sent his father into exile. Yet when young Henry's father returned and made himself king, the young man found himself fighting alongside his father to save both his life and his new dynasty. King Henry V may be one of the most famous kings in English history, but we don't know his birthday for certain, except that he was born in Monmouth Castle around 1386 or 1387 to marry Bohun and Earl Henry Bolingbroke of Darby, who was the son of John of Gaunt, himself one of the sons of the late King Edward III and uncle to the reigning King Richard II. Earl Henry was an accomplished soldier who had fought on crusades with the Teutonic Order against the pagan nations of Eastern Europe. Henry's early education in Monmouth included riding, sword fighting, and falconry. He also learned 3 languages: English, French, and Latin. Earl Henry had been one of the 5 lords appellant who forced King Richard II to purge his court of corrupt favorites, something that King Richard wasn't very fond of. In 1398, Earl Henry quarreled with another lord appellant named Thomas Mowbray. Both men accused each other of treason. King Richard saw a chance to remove 2 of his enemies from the country, so he called for trial by combat to settle the dispute. Earl Henry and Thomas Mowbray met in the lists before a huge crowd that included King Richard II. As Earl Henry charged Mowbray, King Richard suddenly ended the combat by throwing down his scepter, and he sent both Mowbray and Earl Henry into exile. Mowbray was forced from the country for the rest of his life, while Earl Henry was forced to leave for only 6 years. Young Henry, then 10 or 11 years old, became part of King Richard's household. The king didn't do this out of the kindness of his heart. Young Henry was a hostage to ensure his father's good behavior. Young Henry was treated kindly. Richard even put the Bishop of Winchester in charge of young Henry's education, and the youth became especially fond of music lessons. However, the king showed far less kindness to Henry's Lancastrian family. After young Henry's grandfather, John of Gaunt, died in 1399, Richard II swooped in to seize his ancestral estate and used it to finance a campaign in Ireland. This terrified the other landed barons of England, who feared that King Richard would do the same to any of their estates. Young Henry joined Richard on his expedition to Ireland in 1399, during which King Richard knighted him. While he was in Ireland, Earl Henry landed in Ravenspur to reclaim the Duchy of Lancaster. But since Richard had frightened so many of his nobles, they rallied to the new Duke Henry of Lancaster and promoted him to King Henry IV of England. One of King Henry's first acts was to put Richard II in the Tower of London. By then, young Henry viewed King Richard as a father figure, and even went to visit him in the Tower of London. At least until his real father, King Henry, put a stop to that. King Henry also put a stop to Richard's rations, and the King of England starved to death in a jail cell. Yet King Henry IV also made young Henry the Earl of Chester, the Duke of Cornwall, and Prince of Wales on October 15, 1399, to ensure his son's smooth passage to the throne upon his death. However, the new royal family soon faced opposition from the Percy family, and to learn more about Henry Percy, follow the link in the description. Since the Lancaster family had simply seized the throne, anyone else could do the same, which put King Henry IV in a difficult position. Indeed, when young Henry was only 16 years old, the Percy family led an uprising against King Henry IV. The reason for the revolt was because Henry Percy was angry that one of his kinsmen, Edward Mortimer, had been captured by Welsh rebels, and the king was dragging his feet on ransoming his back. The reason why King Henry was slow to bring Edward back to England was because Edward had a distant claim to the throne, so, not surprisingly, King Henry IV wasn't too keen on seeing Edward Mortimer back in England. Henry Percy allied with the Scottish Earl of Douglas and marched south to meet up with Welsh rebels and confront the royal army. 16-year-old Henry fought in his father's army at the Battle of Shrewsbury on July of 1403. By moving fast, the king was able to catch Percy before he could join up with the Welsh, and so the royal army outnumbered the rebels by over 2-1. Young Henry personally joined the fighting, and Henry Percy was killed. Not long after, the rebels dispersed. During the battle, young Henry took an arrow to the face, but kept fighting. After the battle ended in victory for King Henry IV, the surgeons found that the arrow had missed the prince's brain and spine, but embedded in a bone at the back of his skull. They designed a pair of special tongs, plunged them 6 inches into the wound, and removed the arrowhead. After 3 weeks of cleaning and recovery, young Henry had completely recuperated, and that would be the first of many scars he would earn on the battlefield. That wraps things up for this episode of The Legendarium. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.